I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Shirley Franklin. Shirley's been a member of the SWP for 34 years, and she's the chair of the Defend Whittington Hospital Coalition. She's going to tell us about a victory that's just been won there. So welcome, Shirley.
It's a bit unbelievable that we won a victory, isn't it? Just coming to terms with it still myself. If you read in the papers, like today, or just about all of today's papers, you see that the NHS is in total state of disarray, and that people who work in the NHS are complete crap. You know, they are all complete crap, and they go there because they want to make a lot of money from the NHS, don't they? I mean, it's just a nonsense. It's part of this whole agenda of dissing the NHS, because this government wants to privatise the NHS. And the NHS provides, I think, a really good example of what the government is trying to do with the welfare state. They want to fragment it and make it open to market forces. And really what's happened at the Whittington shows what's going on with government policies. In our case, we're part of a founding, along with Candy and Jill, George, and Pete, lots of people here, part of an organisation called Defend the Whittington Hospital Coalition that we set up 3 years ago when they tried to close our A&E. And immediately we formed this, well, there was a public meeting, and out of that we formed this coalition. And it's quite important to know what happened there as we formed a coalition, and the coalition was a coalition of local political parties. It's a non-sectarian coalition, but it also has local health campaigns, local community campaigns, patients, trade unions, hospital trade unions, local trade unions, local trades councils. So it's quite, and actually the MPs, I have to say as well. So it's quite a representative body. I'm not saying that all those people always turned up to meetings, but that's what this coalition was about. And in 2010, which was admittedly just before the last election, there was this plan to close A&E, as Louise knows, A&E, maternity service, paediatrics and intensive care. And we held a meeting, we held a demonstration, we had a day of action, and we won. We won a week before the election. Wow. Right, so then, immediately after that, the Tories come in, and what do? They decide to liberate the NHS. They want to liberate it from the stranglehold of the 45 Act, or 48 NHS that was set up. They wanted to fragment it and basically sell it off. So they produced this white paper called Liberating the NHS, and we held meetings that Candy and George spoke at. They were really useful because really informative in terms of what this act was doing. We also started to get together sort of London NHS, a group of people. I mean, Candy will have to put me right if I got this wrong, but we had quite strong contacts in the area. We built up our knowledge and started to campaign against the white paper. And nobody was taking any notice. I mean, it was really bizarre. People just didn't take notice. Maybe they didn't believe us. I think they thought we were being ultra-left. Because, of course, shock horror, this bloody thing became a bill and then an act. And lo and behold, I'm just kind of trying to get my life in gear. I mean, getting sacked from this institution, the Institute of Education, for being probably too radical. Trying to get my life in order, and I get a phone call from Tom Foote, wonderful, wonderful campaigning journalist Tom Foote, who'd been in a board meeting of the Whittington Hospital that had to become a foundation trust. That's what this legislation says. Every single hospital has to become a foundation trust by, it was April 2014, it's now been delayed a bit. And he was in the board meeting, and the board of the hospital had decided to sell just about half their buildings, get rid of, well, there were 420 beds and go down to 177 beds, get rid of 570 jobs, including 220 nursing staff, reduce the maternity provision, etc. So Tom phoned me, thank God, and we already had an organisation from before, and we immediately shot into action. we're kind of people that walk the streets, really, and we walk the streets with leaflets and we campaign in that way. We've had a petition on the website, we've got an email group, we've got a Facebook group, and not very good at Twittering, I have to say. We do have one of those things, but it's on and off. But we immediately went into action, and it was extraordinary. Well, it wasn't really extraordinary. Like last time, people were really scared and angry, everybody we spoke to. So we galvanised support. And I suddenly realised that this meeting was going to be big. We weren't going to fit everybody into our hall that was of 200 plus people. And the meeting filled every single room in that church. We had to put speakers, like Louise actually. We filled the hall out. Then we had a big demonstration in the rain. And then we lobbied every single board meeting. We had a day of action where, in fact, we occupied it. And they had to leave, and they had to abandon it. Interestingly, we said resign, and since then the chair of the board has resigned, well, has certainly is not there. Anyway, their application for Foundation Trust, this Foundation Trust thing has to be a neat little separate body. It's a bit like an academy. It's something that stands on its own, unlike being part of a local, actually it's really bad on health politics, but it's unlike being part of the local health organisation. And that's really what the Act's done. It's isolated all the different parts of the health service. And it's been quite bizarre. They felt the strength of feeling. They started to get quite defensive. They hadn't consulted us. They were going to go. They were totally intransigent. This is what they were going to do. Then they said, we're going to start listening. Now that's partly because their first application got turned down. And it got turned down because public opinion was against it, because they were selling off too much of the hospital, and they've had to rethink. Now, it was only really last week, I mean, we're talking about all this started in January, and it was only last week that they've actually said that they've turned again. Whittington done it about turn, they've done a U-turn. I have to say, it took me a while to clock that we've won. Oh my God. It took me a while to clock that we've won, because we did win. We won because there's going to be no loss of beds. There's going to be, the BBC and co claim no loss of jobs, and the hospital claims no loss of jobs. It's an area we need to sort out, but certainly no redundancies, which is good. Buildings substantially reduced, but they can't sell them off because actually they have to keep them anyway until they're a Foundation Trust. That's a success, and maternity is no longer capped. So the main things that we were fighting over, our slogan was stop the sell-off. We had a brand, we had the Whittington cat marching along our banner, so that the television could use that. The other thing that I didn't say is the fact we had a coalition with the local newspapers, and it's great that we had front page of the local Camden New Journal, Islington Gazette, and Tribune, and Hammond High, everywhere. They had their own campaigns. You know, there were placard wars on our demonstrations about who was going to claim this, but actually that meant it worked. It was really, really good. So we can't let it go away, because part of the problem is that they want to have early discharge. I urge everybody to look out for that. We are in an area of a lot of elderly, a lot of single parents, a lot of very high mental health problems, all exacerbated by current government policy, which I won't go into. All that stuff's much, much worse. So you can't suddenly send somebody home from hospital where there isn't a social care program. What they're trying to do is quite innovative. You know, it's better to recover at home. It probably is normally, but unless you haven't got the support structure, that isn't better. So we're trying to argue that they use buildings for a convalescent unit, and also that would house mental health, respite care and things like that. That something very positive would come out of the campaign, because they need that. They're not looking at what the government's doing to our local population, and also what is going on in our local population. That's really, really important. So there are still issues. There are still issues around staffing, but actually that's up to the union. It's terribly, terribly important that we don't do the union's job for them. And that is part of the problem all along the line. The union has got to get its act together. And I think it's various reasons that we won. One of them was our slogan of, when they say cut back, we say strike back. I mean, that's, you know, it's important. There has to be, and they have to up the ante, but Unison Region is really reluctant to do that. And I think it's up to Unison members to work out what they're going to do about that. And I'm going to address that briefly before I stop, because they're going to tell me to stop it in a minute. but it's absolutely crucial. I mean, the NHS, it's our NHS, and it's our hospitals, and it belongs to all of us. Now, every single person needs to see that there's an attack on their NHS, and so I don't think we should leave the struggle to health workers. We can have local campaigns, but actually, I think we need to up the ante. I think the NHS should be our poll tax. You know, we can grab other bits and pieces, all these other things that are going on, but the NHS affects all of us. It doesn't affect this government that uses private healthcare and they want to sell it off to their mates to make money out of our health needs. It affects all of us. It's a class issue, and we need to fight it in a class way, and I think we ought to be working in our unions to take action to save our NHS. It's absolutely vital, and I do think that slogan of when they say cut back, we say strike back, has to guide what we're doing. We've had a victory, but we've won a battle, but we haven't won the war. To win the war, we've got to take up the ante, we take strike action, and we also work towards going up to Manchester on the 29th of September and support that demonstration along with workers right the way across the country.
And I'd like to welcome Louise Irvine. Louise is an NHS GP. She's chair of Save Lewisham Hospital campaign and a member of Keep Our NHS Public. And Louise is also going to tell us about her campaign. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. I don't know whether to keep my glasses on or off. I wanted to give you just a brief timeline about the Lewisham campaign, because I think some of you are from around different parts of the country, so I can't assume you all know, but I don't want to bore you with all the details, just briefly. Lewisham is a borough in southeast London, and it's one of the most deprived boroughs in England. It has a very good local district general hospital, and I think that's actually relevant because there is a big attack at the moment on district general hospitals, and they're actually having to fight for their very survival across the country. So it's a good district general hospital with quite a big catchment of about 300,000, and it provides a full range of services. And as a local GP, I've got every confidence in it. I've used it for my own healthcare, my family, and obviously my patients have referred them. And nothing's perfect, but it's a very good local hospital that meets the needs of that very deprived community very well. In summer of 2012, we heard the announcement that a special administrator called the Trust Special Administrator had been appointed to solve the financial problems of our neighbouring trust, which was South London NHS Healthcare Trust, which is, I don't know if you know the geography of South East London, why should you, but further to southeast of Lewisham is Greenwich, Bexley and Bromley, and they were all part of one big trust, and they had very serious financial problems. The main reason for those financial problems of South East London Healthcare Trust was private finance initiative debts, unaffordable, unpayable, toxic debts. Just to give you an idea of the kind of money we're talking about, it cost two hospitals were built. A new hospital was built, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Woolwich, and the Princess Royal Hospital in Bromley. They cost about £215 million to build. So far, we, the people, have paid back 600 million. We still owe 2 billion over 30 years. Part of that money is supposed to be used for maintenance, about 40% of it, but the 60% of it, about 1.2 billion, is pure profit, pure interest rates to offshore tax havens, all the PFI companies are located now in offshore tax havens. So that's another issue, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. But because of this dire financial problem, this special legislation was used, which was legislation that had been brought in under Labour, called the Unsustainable Provider Regime, which was meant to be, the idea is a kind of troubleshooter goes in and sort of sorts out the financial problems of a trust. Now, of course, you couldn't sort out those financial problems because the one thing you cannot do is you cannot renegotiate or not pay that debt. So the only way that they could find to solve those financial problems was to cannibalise the neighbouring trust, which was Lewisham, to propose the closure of 60% of the services there, not just the A&E, but also the acute medical, surgical, paediatric wards, intensive care unit and maternity. Why does closing a neighbouring hospital help the financial problems of the other trust? Well, it's all to do with payment by results and patient flow. The more patients that are forced into another place, the money follows the patient, the money comes into the coffers, and that's the way you close something that's financially successful. Even in business terms, it doesn't actually make sense to close a financially successful business to show up a failing one, but that's their logic when it suits them. So we found this out in about September, October 2012. We, just ordinary activists in Lewisham, have been fighting against the Health and Social Care Bill with, doing what you've all probably been doing, out there leafleting in the streets and trying to get, a bit of a mass campaign going and, not really getting there because things like privatisation and PFI are unfortunately quite abstract concepts for many people. Doesn't mean that I don't mean that in a patronising way. I think when you actually get engaging with people, they do want to know more and they do understand, but the key thing is you don't really get that opportunity normally to reach out to so many people about these issues because there's just no way of doing it and the media didn't cover it. So we have been campaigning like anything. We decided to set up a campaign to save our hospital when we heard that Lewisham was going to be involved in it. And we started off very modestly, just as our speaker from Whittington said, we organised a public meeting and we thought we'll have it in the hospital, in the auditorium, in the hospital, which is great. The hospital doesn't have their auditorium. And we thought, well, it's a big auditorium, will we fill it? We've been to so many meetings, we've only got like 20, 30 people. Well, we had to have 2 overflow meetings in the hospital and a massive overflow meeting in another venue that night. 700 people came. Our first demo in November was about 10 to 15,000 people. After that, the campaign grew and grew and grew, and culminated in a huge demonstration at the end of January in the snow with 25,000 people. And that was on the eve of Jeremy Hunt's decision about whether he would approve or not approve the Trust Special Administrator's proposals, which were to close the A&E, all the emergency acute admitting wards and the maternity. The Jeremy Hunt made a fudge, I think because of the power. It's a bit difficult to say, was this a fudge to sort of deflect the movement which we built up, definitely, but he wouldn't have felt the need to fudge without actually having had a mass campaign. So the fudge was that we're going to have a smaller A&E that will still admit some people. I won't go into detail about that. It's a complete it is actually still an urgent care centre dressed up as an A&E. We've also had a massive People's Commission of Inquiry, again, to listen to the evidence that Hunt and the TSA ignored, with 50 witnesses from patients, from public, from staff, from all the organisations that in Lewisham as a great voice of the people. And this was chaired by Michael Mansfield QC, and it's an amazing, inspiring event. It's like taking power back and saying we'll do our own consultation because we don't trust yours. And it's all on YouTube and you can look at it on our website. And we've also mounted a legal challenge against Jeremy Hunt's decision because we said that he used the wrong legislation, and there's lots of detail about the legal challenge. I'll just say that the court days last week, 3 days in court, we'll hear the result at the end of July. Legal challenges are part of the fight. It's not about having illusions of the judiciary and all that. It's part of the fight. It's one of the many strands you can take up to fight. We would never have had the confidence to mount a legal challenge without this massive popular campaign, this upsurge from people. And our campaign is a classic united front. I think that's why it's successful. We want to try to generalise a bit from this. It's a united front. It is non-sectarian. It doesn't exclude anybody, except, if you want to support our hospital, you're in our campaign, okay? It's been hard as the chair because sometimes there are tendencies pulling it in various directions, as you can probably imagine, but we've kept it all together. It's got loads of ordinary people from Lewisham. I'm a GP. One day, one of our, a young locum doctor that we were using to fit, she's been doing locums all around Lewisham, and she said, wow, it's amazing, so many patients are coming in and telling me they were on the march, and what's happening, and we have to defend our hospital. And that's interesting, because I would have understood them saying it to me, because I'm identified, but they were saying this to this young locum who wasn't identified with the campaign, and that just shows that people are really talking about it across Lewisham. We've had all our doctors are supporting us, which is very lucky. We've got all the GPs behind us and all the hospital doctors. We've got the nurses and all the allied health professionals supporting us. We've got faith leaders. We've got even local small businesses. We've got trade union branches. Unite has been fantastic, but I'm afraid Unison hasn't been that great, although we've had individual Unison branches have been supportive. We've had people whose main identity is as mothers of children who want to use paediatric services on the maternity, and we've had pensioners involved. So the contrast between this level of mobilisation around issues such as privatisation and PFI that I talked about earlier, which was very hard to get any kind of level, and this mass campaign for our hospital, a truly mass campaign, which is what we need to defend our NHS. Is this a problem? Is it the fact that people only get active when there's a real tangible threat a problem? If what we really want is a broad defence of the NHS and also against privatisation and PFI. No, I don't think so. I think the process of becoming active is in itself a radical step for many people. The process of going on a demo, coming to a public meeting, taking a leaflet, engaging in a conversation with somebody at a street stall. This gives people a huge sense of collective power, solidarity and of enthusiasm. And at that point they're open to other ideas, a dialogue, and that's why we've had intense leafleting, regular street stalls every Saturday in various locations, loads of public events that engage and involve people. We've used a lot of flair and imagination. We haven't done boring old lefty things. I'm afraid that that's one of the things that we have to learn, to be a lot more imaginative, a lot more involving. We've used social media. We've made use of all the talents that people come forward. You know, people want to make videos or design a poster or design a leaflet or to just do something. We've also had open, inclusive, regular, fortnightly planning meetings, as well as a steering group, so we've met regularly and everyone can come to that. And we've had enough people to be involved that we've been able to sort of set up working groups to work on particular areas and sort of take forward decisions we've made so that we don't all get exhausted. And that has led to even the Hunt campaign, which was an initiative from Lewisham that was then supported across London and with Unite, where we actually took the fight to Hunt's constituency and actually had a fantastic response from people in Farnham who welcomed our presence there. We've also did a big campaign on Section 75 and spearheaded some of that response to the Section 75 regulations. We've had a big orientation towards our local press, and they have supported us. They've actually adopted the campaign. That's also the national press picks up stuff if the local press are picking stuff up. So work with your local press. We've developed relationships with journalists and begun to break through some of that barrier of getting some press coverage. So just to finish off, we fight on different fronts. We have done detailed medical and academic critiques of the proposals. We've involved clinicians, doctors and the CCG. We've even used our MPs who have asked questions in Parliament, which have been very useful. The local council has supported us and we've pushed them to give actual, just finishing now, just to actual financial support and material support. And we've had reasonably good support from some of the unions. So, but the most important thing is very public, open events. And I think that's what you need. The lesson is, it has to be a united front, it has to be open and inclusive, it has to be bold and imaginative, and it has to go reach out to the whole community. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce the final speaker on the panel. I'm so sorry to have to cut all these speakers short because all the things they're telling us are so interesting and you want to hear more, but we are very confined with time. So Karen's Reissmann, a member of the Unison National Executive. She's speaking today in a personal capacity. She's been involved in a number of strikes and campaigns over many years. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you. Things that you have to say about the health service at the moment is that we are facing the worst crisis in the health service in the whole of its existence. We have now the legislation that allows them to privatise every single bit of it, and it is being privatised at a faster and faster rate. But we also have the biggest cuts that have ever taken place in any health service anywhere in the world. And that means that the effect of it is absolutely devastating. And when you hear politicians and senior civil servants on television and in the papers, which you will do more and more often, telling us that the NHS is increasingly unaffordable, then that's an argument that we have to take on. It was created in the aftermath of the Second World War and the devastation of that, and it was affordable then. And the Tories opposed it then. They didn't want a health service where the likes of you and me could get free treatment when we needed it. For them, millionaires, they've always got an option of private healthcare. We haven't got the same option. And what the Tories are doing is they are choosing to use the austerity crisis, the economic crisis, to destroy the things that they never wanted in the first place. And therefore they are using this crisis to deliberately destroy the NHS as a safeguard for all of us when we're ill. And I think that's a choice they make. And there is a choice. You know, they could, for example, tax Google, Amazon, Costa Coffee, Vodafone and pay for the NHS 10 times over. They could choose not to build Trident, 100 billion, and build the health service and education and the welfare state instead. They could choose to to tax the rich and to, you know, you think of the 1,000 richest people, if we just tax them a third of their profits that they've made since this government came in, we could clear the NHS deficit like that. So this is not something that we can do nothing about. This is a choice that the government have made about where to spend the wealth of this country, and they're choosing not to spend it on the NHS. And the more that they cut, the more that care is affected, and the more that there are bad stories, because you haven't got enough time to provide good care, and we end up providing bad care. And then they use that, because they want to say, isn't it a load of crap in the first place, and we need to do even more of the things that are making it crap. And I think, you know, the Tories, with the help of the Lib Dems, are instituting this regime that actually puts the whole of the NHS at risk, and we have to put a stop to that. Just one little example. NHS Direct has been replaced by 111. Right? The reason 111 doesn't work is because it costs only 30% of what NHS Direct used to cost. So no wonder it doesn't work, and 2 of them have already gone bust in the meantime. And they're saying that the scale of the cuts that they're now going to have to make will mean that a third of the hospitals in England will be at risk in the next few years. They're talking about a 25% reduction in beds. They're talking about such a significant change in what we're used to. The old district hospitals in every town is no longer a viable option, and one will have to close and you have to transfer. So the sort of fights that you've heard about at Lewisham and at Whittingham, and actually going on in all sorts of hospitals, will increase to virtually every locality across the country. And even when hospitals do merge with the idea of closing one eventually, because we're now a business, I mean, at Bournemouth and Poole, when they wanted to merge, were referred to the Office for Fair Trading for breaking the anti-competitive rules by being the biggest business in town and not therefore open to the private sector to compete with. And they spent 1.67 million in that trust on anti-competitive lawyers in order to try and force that merger through. So it's no wonder that we're in the mess we're in. And I think we have to be quite clear, this mess is caused by the cuts that are being made and the privatisation. The people responsible are the bankers, the financial system and the capitalists. And the scapegoating that they are trying to do to blame somebody else is absolutely out of order. It is not the fault of GPs who are seeing 40 patients a day and are overwhelmed with the workload that's increasing day by day. It is not the fault of migrants who come to this country and use our health service. We saw the outrageous attempt a couple of weeks ago to charge migrants £1,000 to come into this country in order to use the NHS. And I think we have to say very, very clearly, that amount that the migrants cost, even at the highest estimate of what it costs, is a 15th of what it costs to implement the Health and Social Care Act. Right? 15 times as much spent on a reorganisation that nobody wanted and nobody needed. The real problem is not migrants. And I think the idea of introducing a notion of charging is to say, we'll start with migrants and then it'll be you. And that's a very deliberate attempt by this government. And to be honest, as a healthcare worker, I don't want to be checking with a load of forms and a lot of tick spot cultures every time when every one of us comes into the health service, whether or not you're entitled to it for free or not. Because that's a waste of my time, and it takes away from the care that I do. And I think there is a real attempt at divide and rule when it comes to how we're fighting the NHS today. And I think UKIP are attempting to take advantage of that. I would do an example, but I don't think I've got time. And I think we have to be clear. The Tories are not strong when it comes to the issue of the NHS. They tried to pretend they like the NHS. Portillo said, if we'd said what we were going to do, we would have never got elected. And I think he's right. I don't often agree with Portillo, but I actually think he's right on that. Cuts and privatisation, particularly of the health service, are not popular, and every time you oppose them, you are popular. My problem when I do a stall in a town centre is that you can't pack up, buggers keep coming and you can't get rid of them enough to shut down and shut your stall down. And I think we have to ask ourselves, why is it that they get away with it? Because if you think of a place like Stafford Hospital is the same hospital where they killed between 400 and 1,200 extra people over the course of a few years, 3 years, because they were facing cuts and had a huge, massive number of investigations because of that. If they can get 45,000 people out on the streets to defend their hospital, then we can get people out on the streets to defend any hospital and any health service across Britain. But I think they get away with it because the Labour Party actually agree with 90% of the policies that this government has. The £20 billion was introduced by the Labour government, Andy Burnham, and was kept by the Tories. The privatisation was rushed at a massive rate through under Labour, more than Thatcher had ever done, and therefore the Tories feel quite legitimately that they're just continuing that policy. And I think that makes it difficult for us because of the impact that has on trade unions and their ability to fight back. Because I think time and again we see trade unions only fighting with half the power that they can. Often they're interested in workers' rights, not in services, so they're quite happy to let jobs go, they're quite happy to let services go, they don't join in community campaigns. And I think where workers have fought back, so you look at Mid-Yorkshire, a fantastic strike of admin and clerical medical secretaries, took 9 days strike against redundancies and pay cuts, who got massive support from the population. And I think you have to say that those strikes can happen, and it's fantastic when they do, but I think there's not enough of them. And I think people often feel that you can't shift our union to get them. Well, to be honest, if you can get them in Mid-Yorkshire, I think sometimes we're not arguing hard enough to do that. But part of it is people that feel the unions sort of got half an eye on what the Labour Party wants, and the Labour Party doesn't want strikes, because if you're on strike, you ask Ed Miliband, does he support you or not? And if he does support you, the Tories have a go. And if he doesn't support you, he loses votes. So it's probably better if we don't ask the question at all and we don't go on strike and we make sacrifices. And I think the pensions dispute has had a number of impacts. Most health workers have never ever been on strike before November the 30th, not in their whole working life. And most health workers thought they couldn't go out on strike. And I think one of the things that the Tories threw at us is, how could you possibly go out on strike as a health worker and harm patients and go on strike? And to be honest, I get fed up of those crocodile tears that they always throw at you when you go out on strike. There are 6,000 nurses jobs gone since this government came into power. That's 6,000 nurses who are on permanent strike every week, this week, next month, next year, and the Tories don't shed one single tear for the care that they don't provide and for the patients that they don't look after. So don't come shouting at me when I take a day's strike to preserve the health service, to make sure that those 6,000 people are there for next week and the week after. And I think we have to not put up with that. And I think the anger that we felt in the pensions dispute is still there. And one of the things I want to say to people who don't work in the health service is those community campaigns make a huge difference in terms of can we or can't we shift the union in the way that it works. So you look at some of the way that community campaigns have had an impact on health workers who for some reason don't feel they're supported and don't feel they're popular. If you take them to a stall on a street in your town and you find people queuing up to sign your petition, it makes you think if you defend that strike you will be supported. If there's a huge demonstration in defence of your service, it makes you think that if you campaign to do that you will be supported. So those community campaigns make a real difference, and I think it's important when you do them that you always try and feed back as much into the people who work in those hospitals, whether you've got official support of the union branch or not. And I know there's been difficulties with a whole number in Unison, because those strong leads can make a difference. Even in Unison, there are 17 ballots going on in Unison at the moment, and I think it does make a difference, the fact that there are community campaigns. And I suppose I want to end with what our best opportunity is at the moment around the health service. There will be a national demonstration at the Tory party conference in defence of the NHS, and I think the fact that unions can be shifted, 2 days before Dave Prentice, my union leader, announced that, he said that he wasn't going to have a demonstration, and he was forced to change his mind. And I think some of the people in this room who've been campaigning have played some part in that, although I think there are other factors as well. But it is now backed by the TUC. Unison activists have had 3 emails telling them that they've got to build it. When the National Executive Committee met, an email went out to all Unison activists saying the sort of planning for the demonstration in Manchester must start now. Branches are being told to put it on their agendas and to organise transport and leafleting. Unite are doing the same. Other unions will join in. This has the potential to be huge. And I think the feeling that we felt in November the 30th, that the whole of Britain was pissed off with the way the world was going, didn't agree with austerity and wanted to do something about it. I think there's a sort of a confusion about where has all that gone. I don't think those people have gone, and I don't think that anger's gone. I think what to do with it has often gone, how to express it. I think the march in Manchester gives an opportunity to express it and gives those people who don't feel confident a chance to feel confident again. And that's why I think that we have to come out of this Marxism. We have to go back to wherever we've come from. We have to organise the planning meetings. We have to produce the leaflets. We have to sort of, plan, are we going to do public meetings beforehand? Because it will make a huge difference, not just to the NHS, but the attack on austerity generally. And I think that's the task that set us. And I think the potential, given the sort of strength of feeling that people have over the NHS, is huge. And we can make it fantastic, and it can make a real difference.
And I think it's great to hear from these campaigns, and I think we have to learn some lessons from them. I think the first thing is we should take the Whittington victory and go away and shout about it to everybody, because we need some victories, don't we? And you've bloody done it, so it's fantastic. But I also think that we can take some lessons from both of these campaigns, because actually my experience is there's two different kinds of health service campaigns. And there is another kind that aren't like Whittington and Lewisham, and actually they're campaigns that are much more run by one political party, by the Labour Party, and they can be very good, but the problem with them is they're really aimed at showing how bad things are now and encouraging people to vote at the next election, and not necessarily geared towards winning in the here and now. And they're not inclusive in the way that Shirley and Louise described. And I think we've got to fight for any campaign to look like these. And there's some brilliant ideas. The People's Commission that Louise talked about, everyone should have one. If you've got threats to, go away and do it. Learn how to do it from Lewisham. But in terms of where we go, say that the legal threat at Lewisham isn't successful, what next? And we do have to debate out the tactics. What about work-ins and occupations and strikes? We did them in the past. I know things are different now, but in the past it always came, as people have said, the confidence came from the community campaigns. It didn't necessarily come from inside. And so we have to have that debate. But the last thing is that however we force them, at last we have forced the trade unions to call the national demonstration on the 29th of September. The way we build it, we had a meeting yesterday, people said we don't have a campaign. Get an organising meeting for the 29th of September. I've seen teachers, there's a teacher's badge saying defend the NHS 29th of September. They're already, people are already bidding to build this demonstration. We want everybody involved, every single union, every single community campaign. If we make that massive, we'll come out of it locally with the kind of campaigns that can have some more victories and begin to build the movement that we need.
Go and ask you there, just carry on.
John McCauley. I've come down from Glasgow for this is my first time at Marxism. I've really enjoyed it. I'm just going to be quick, short, sharp and straight to the point. I'm not going to take up the 3 minutes. Why don't you just go into the hospitals and take over them? Simple as that. Never mind with your committees, never mind with your health watchdogs or whatever. Go into your hospitals, take your hospitals back. Don't let them close them. Because I know they're going to close. I know some of them, it's Charing Cross, you said they're trying to close, isn't it? It's one of the ones they're trying to close as well. Yeah, take it back. They belong to us anyway. Or should I say, they belong to you lot, because you're Londoners. We've got our own separate one in Scotland.
I liked what Louise said about, she talked about a mass campaign, and then she said a truly mass campaign, and I think that's what we need. And I think the 29th of September Tory conference will be one emblem of that truly mass campaign, and I think it should involve legal challenges. I think we should have more legal challenges, and you might think if I'm in favour of the barricades and all of that, I'd say no, because a truly mass campaign involves everything. Obviously we shouldn't stop any other form of campaigning among health workers and patients while we wait for that. But if there are consultants on some commission or something talking about legal methods, get them to do all the legal methods, because I think virtually never is there enough public consultation before any changes under the 2006 Act. So use legal methods, but much more, as important as that, at the same time, is this balance between the health workers and the patients. And I think you need both, because there's always optimism and pessimism in NHS fights. And I find if you talk to workers, health workers, they say, oh, it's no use us taking action. What we need is the patients and the community. And if you go to the patients and the community, they say, oh, well, we're not in there. It should be the staff in the hospital. That's the pessimistic use of this approach, but it can also be used optimistically, so that if you do get workers in a hospital fighting, then you can argue to the patients, you can argue to the public that the NHS workers are on your side because they're fighting too, and vice versa. And this thing about health workers not taking strike action, which sometimes you hear and they're always condemned, I find that emergency levels during strikes in a hospital ward, for example, are actually higher than they are on a normal working day, because the management tried to set emergency levels much higher than normal staffing. So I just think that we need a truly mass campaign. Involves health workers, it involves the community, and it involves all methods. But the room for manoeuvre, I'll finish on this, the room for manoeuvre financially is getting, in legal terms, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because, the hard wiring of the profit and loss is built more and more into the system. That means that victories, when they do happen, are truly inspiring. And if you get health workers and the community fighting together, and you get a victory which really, it feels like it's an immovable force, immovable object, and an irresistible force of workers and the patients together. And I think if we do really fight back, the immovable object of Cameron's mentality can be crushed to dust.
Thank you. Black t-shirt over there.
Yeah, George from Unite. I think we've got real opportunities now to save the NHS, and it's important that we take those opportunities, because, to be honest, it's starting to feel a little bit like the end game in terms of the fight to defend the health service. The scale of the cuts that they're now floating, 40 to 50 billion pounds worth of cuts. This would be an end of the NHS. This would be cuts of 50% of NHS funding, the end of a recognisable health service, if we don't push back hard in the coming months, if we don't make very real gains, then actually we will have lost the NHS, and short of a socialist revolution, it's going to be fantastically difficult to get it back. I was thinking about the balance of forces, and there are some real strengths on our side. We've heard about the model community campaigns, the fantastic campaigns at the WIT in Lewisham. I'd like to see those campaigns written up as a guide to action that we can start to roll out and use more generally, because there are lessons to be learned from those real successes. Another strand, something we've got going for us, Karen talked about the small strikes, the small fight backs that are taking place amongst health workers. Not enough, but we have still got trade union density there. We saw from the pensions dispute back in November 2011 that health workers can still be won for a fight. And to be honest, if the trade union leaders hadn't betrayed us then, I think the fight to defend the NHS would be in a very different place now. But the biggest opportunity that we have got, it is the national demonstration, and this was not given to us. We fought for it, and we fought for it inside the unions. In Unite, we battled and battled and battled, and we won McCluskey to it. And then Dave Prentice had to run and play catch-up so that he wasn't going to be outflanked. You know, these people are untrustworthy, but they can be won to a fight when our side puts up the pressure. That demonstration, I think the biggest opportunity, we have to drive it deep, deep into our communities. This can't just be something for activists. We have to build that on a massive scale. I think there are things that make me nervous too. People mobilise around their A&E, their maternity unit. We've got to tackle that. We've got to take forward a political argument with people that this is a fight for the whole of the health service. The demonstration, I think, creates an opportunity for us to put that argument and win that argument. Another problem is the lack of confidence and the lack of organisation of health workers. One of our jobs in the SWP, I think, is that people who are not health workers give the practical support and encouragement to help our health workers challenge cuts in the workplace, to build the trench warfare, to start fighting back, even if it's tiny victories, damage limitation. Every single fight builds confidence, and we can't walk away from that. And actually my biggest area of nervousness, it is the role of the trade union bureaucracy, to be absolutely honest, because they did betray us on November the 30th. They did walk away from a fight on pensions. I don't trust them on this. And while we're building for the national demonstration, I think one of the discussions that we need to have with the best activists in the movement is, yes, let's build for that demonstration, but let's fight also for what's going to come after that demonstration. And let's keep a watchful eye on those trade union leaders and make sure they don't sell us out again. Having gone through all the nervous stuff, the demonstration is a huge, huge opportunity. Let's go absolutely mental. It's going to change the political landscape.
Caroline McFay from Manchester, sorry.
Excuse me.
Hi, I wanted to pick up on the issues of strikes in the health service and the issue that a gentleman, a couple of speakers ago brought up about emergency cover. I've been on strike in the health service on a couple of occasions, and the first time when we were going on strike, it's mental health services, and our trust refused to talk to us about emergency cover. And then we were horrified on the day before the strike when people just came into the ward and said there's coaches outside, all the patients need to get on the coaches and they're going to be taken to a private hospital 100 miles away. And you know, everyone felt really bad about that, all the nurses that were due to start strike action the following day. But we had long discussion about it, and they had the option of speaking to us and of arranging safe cover for those wards. It was the management's decision not to do that, and the management's responsibility to send those patients 100 miles away to be looked after in Doncaster. And some of them patients didn't come back for 6 months because by the time the strike was over, the beds were filled with other patients and they were transferred back to Manchester for a long, long time. On November the 30th, they agreed to speak to us, and some of the wards, when they were asking for emergency cover, they were asking for pretty much more than they have anyway, because we work on emergency cover every day of the year. There is no such thing as emergency cover, you know, when that's what you're working on. There isn't any slack for reducing the amount of staff on the wards, because every day they're working full out. You know, we heard at the NHS meeting yesterday about people working through the breaks, staying late all the time. Shifts have been changed so that people are working double shifts so that they don't have to have as many in each week. And you know, it's a responsibility of the Tories and Labour for the cuts that they brought in, and of each individual NHS trust to make sure that there is emergency cover when we go on strike. But no nurse should be made to feel guilty for going on strike, because we've got to protect what we've got now, which we're losing it all the time. getting attack after attack on wages, on terms and conditions, on the staffing levels on the wards, and in community. Everywhere we look, there's no backup services outside. Mental health patients haven't got the services in the community that they used to have that kept them well and stopped them from coming back into hospital. So all the time we've got to fight, and if we need to go on strike, we should encourage that, and we should push our trade unions, as other people have said, to allow us to do that.
I'm a mental health service user from Lewisham, and hearing Louise brings it all back, and it's fantastic. And not only did we beat the fascists in 1977, but we turned out 25,000 people for to save our hospital. So people were saying, it's Lewisham, it's how we roll. People were saying that it shouldn't be like. It's difficult to turn out 25,000 people on our demo and then say there's only 7,000 people on the London demo, and how can we make how can we generalise it to make the to make people's individual hospitals campaigns into a wider defence of the NHS, and I think that is one thing we need to think about. But in our campaign, because Louise said very eloquently how the hospital campaign in Lewisham is kind of based on the fact that the hospitals in Greenwich and Bexley are massively in debt, and people started out on the campaign thinking actually their hospitals are shit and their hospitals are losing all the money, save our hospitals. And we tried very, very hard from the start to say actually we want to save all the hospitals, all the hospitals in South East London. North London, go ahead. We tried to generalise it from the start about the whole thing. One question is, Jock asked, why don't we just take over the hospitals? And this has also been a question on throughout the campaign. A lot of people. There's some people in the campaign saying actually you can't take any strike action, you can't really jeopardise public goodwill, and there's also a whole number of other people saying occupy, 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 and it's quite difficult to kind of maintain a kind of like a sensible position in between the two. The campaign's been fantastic, but the Unison branch, the Unison AGM in the hospital had 15 people go to it, and it's. People, Unison activists are leaving Unison to join Unite because that's a union that fights. And so I was wondering, how we should argue about that, and yes, okay.
Thank you.
I've got three more speakers lined up. There's a lady here, and a gentleman there with glasses. And I don't know if we'll have time for any more. We'll see how we go, okay?
I'm Brent Varnigan's comrade from York, and also in the Defend Our NHS group York, which is related to Keep Our NHS Public. I went to the AGM yesterday, the Keep Our NHS Public, and Linda Coucher spoke to us about a new threat to the NHS, and you really must get on top of this one. It's the US and EU free trade agreements in the NHS. Now what this does, it's a bit like neoliberalism. What it does is it allows, after November 14 of next year, so we must get ourselves mobilised, it's supposedly to increase international trade. What it will do to the NHS is it'll promote transnational corporations to come over for corporation benefit, and they will look to the NHS as a cash cow. And rather than being about reducing tariffs on goods and all that sort of thing, the main aim is regulatory harmonisation between the US and the EU, which will pass regulations which will not protect people anymore and ensure that public services are safe and honestly run, and the effect will be reduced and lowest levels to suit the corporations, and many of our lives will be affected. Once this happens, It's irreversible, comrades. You must stop this. And if you want to know anything more about it, you have to go either onto the Keep Our NHS public website, or there is a petitions website, Direct Gov Petitions, and also 38 Degrees, thank goodness, is taking this up. I do applaud the organisations that's gone on. We've had wonderful success in York. We've had a march earlier in the year. We've got the public, in with us now, and we've made sure that we're on the streets and we're telling people everything. This will be the next thing on Tuesday to tell the public about. Thank you.
I'm Linda Bennett. I'm a retired Unison member, and as a consequence I've been out of touch with the union activity. So I'm really interested to ask the speaker that spoke from Unison as to why they're not involved with any of the NHS campaigns. That's it.
Ron Singer, I work with Unite and with Keep Our NHS Public, and I think that last question, I've been asked it a dozen times as I do meetings, and it's equal to the question is why didn't the BBC inform the public as a public health broadcaster exactly what was going on with the NHS. And of course, being on the street, leafleting, it's actually, quite soft. Most people support the NHS, give them a leaflet, but it actually leads you into discussions far beyond the NHS. For instance, about why wasn't this in any manifesto? Why wasn't it in the coalition agreement? How come it's been voiced to us? And we've heard, because they wouldn't dare put it publicly, because we know that they wouldn't have got elected. So you get into all these discussions about the BBC, about the role of the mass media and so on. Things are bad. I'm a retired GP. Things are bad, but I have to tell you they're actually going to get worse. And I don't mean to patronise you by saying that, because I don't think any of us have any idea about how the NHS is going to shrink. We have to wait and see. And part of the amount of shrinkage that goes on will depend upon the resistance that we manage to generate through the union, through KMP and so on. But just to give you a flavour, some of the things that haven't been mentioned that are in the Act, and obviously this only applies to England, is that hospitals, foundation trusts, are now allowed to generate 49% of their income from private sources. Currently it was between 3 and 5%, so it's now 49%, okay? So the direction of travel is pretty obvious. Your GP, unfortunately, is now totally conflicted, not because they want to be, but because by law they have to be a member of one of these clinical commissioning groups. And clinical commissioning groups were sold to us as GPs designing your local services. A load of absolute nonsense. They're being tied up with red tape. They are being overseen by massive organisations covering 1.5 to 2 million population size called clinical support units, and they will have to be privatised by 2016. So in one fell swoop, they will privatise the whole commissioning process, the buying and designing and all the rest of it of the NHS, as well as attacking the provider arm. We've heard that the anti-competitive laws are being used, about the trade agreements that are going on. This is a massive attack, not just on the NHS, of course, but on the whole welfare state. So, information. There's a great book called NHS SOS. It's available here. There are 12 copies down in bookmarks, or here, I don't know where they are, but there are 12 copies around. Okay, and that's how the medical profession has effectively sold out the NHS, effectively. There's an old one that is...
And the proceeds go to Keep Our NHS Public.
They do. Thank you. And the other book I want to mention is The Plot Against the NHS, which documents how this is not new, how actually they've been planning to do this for 25 years. And that's really, it's research, it's annotated and all the rest of it. It's a good read. So the information on the website of Keep Our NHS Public is very good. NHS Support Federation also has a very good website.
We were talking about the Labour Party. I do need to say that we had one particularly proactive member of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, in our campaign. He took questions to Parliament, and after our demonstration, Hunt was on the telly saying when Foundation Trust hospitals are formed, there shouldn't be any cutback in the hospital provision. Now that was a consequence of our activity, but it's also related to Jeremy Corbyn's activity in Parliament. So it is important to try and involve the MPs, but as people probably know, Jeremy's a good lefty MP. An area that's been referred to, but I think we really need to organise around is mental health. There's been a massive cutback in mental health beds. It's dire, it's really dire, and it's the weakest section, of course, in terms of the fight back. We do need to include mental health in what we're saying. In terms of building for the 29th, one of the important arguments we've been using, and we've already started building for it, is that an attack on one hospital actually literally affects other hospitals. In London, you know, as hospitals in our area and A&Es and things are closed down, then there's going to be more pressure and less beds on others. So the arguments are very, very simple. You know, this can be one. It's not, you know, people have talked about the horrible, horrible things that are going to happen. There are horrible things in the pipeline, but it can be one. But, you know, the information needs to go out there. It's not out there. People cannot realise what's going on in our NHS. We need to educate people. It's absolutely crucial. We had an invitation to the NHS birthday party the other day, and we put some information about the decimation of the NHS on the back of it. So small people can't read it typically, but anyway. It's there. You need to put that information out with all your bump, that our NHS is being fragmented, privatised, decimated. It's absolutely disgusting. The other thing, comrades, I want you to know, I asked the chair to say that I've been in the party for 35 years. I have been in the party for 35 years, and it's part of the reason for our success. We have a strong organisation, well, it's a kind of kernel of an organisation, if you like, or the colonel-in-chief is sitting there, but there is an organisation that really fights for the NHS within the SWP. It's been brilliant. What I've been able to do is talk to key comrades, the ones I've mentioned, Jill and Candy, and people like that really have helped us. It isn't just a campaign, it's an informed campaign that was deeply, deeply strategic, and the strategy comes from being in the Socialist Workers' Party. I've just been to a meeting on alienation. The Socialist Workers' Party can help out on that. We need to be together, comrades. We're a non-sectarian campaign, but a non-sectarian campaign that's guided from the Socialist Workers' Party. So, you know, please join us. So I just want to say, what we need to do is educate, organise and agitate. We are happy and they are few.
Thank you. I haven't got much to say. I think the battles to defend hospitals are going to happen everywhere, and I think that is a key place that we should be orientating to in terms of raising, so that there are many other such campaigns, like in Lewisham, like in Whittington, South West London, North West London, and then up in Trafford Hospital, Manchester. There's going to be a huge reorganisation happening there with lots of closures. That's where people are beginning to feel that something is being taken away from them, something they really value, and that's where you start to get people active and mobilised, and that's where you start to have the conversations and start to raise awareness about the wider issues. I would say that the powerful message I'd like to give is that we have to have a united front. And certainly in Lewisham we have had lots of very good Labour Party activists, very, very, very committed Labour Party activists. We must have a campaign that, although we have raised criticisms of Labour's policies, or that they paved the way to privatisation, the PFI stuff, has to be done in such a way that it doesn't alienate the actual activists on the ground who want to defend their NHS. So it's how you say it, and it's not about mincing words, but it's about how attitude and approach in a way that involves them and puts pressure on the Labour leadership. And I think that there is some room there to put pressure on them over the NHS. And we've had our Free Labour MPs in Lewisham have been very active in supporting our campaign, and they've done quite useful things like asking particular questions in Parliament, which were then quoted in the judicial review and were key. Certain things were pivotal in that judicial review based on those Labour MPs' questions. So I don't think you should dismiss any of that. On the question of occupations, I think that's a really attractive idea. These are our hospitals, this is our NHS, these are our resources, we the people own them, and they cannot take them away from us. However, I do think that it needs a lot more work. It's not, I think at the moment it's a bit of an empty slogan. And I think that we'd have to actually think seriously, what would that really mean? I don't think you just take over a hospital, because There are patients there. We can't just all invade the wards and get in the way of the nurses and people doing their jobs, and what about patient privacy and all that. So, you know, that's one issue. If they start emptying out the wards and then preparing places for us to sell them off, which is what they're planning to do with 60 Andalusian sites, so you have empty buildings, by all means, I think that would be quite an easy thing to get in there and stop them selling it off. But I do think we have to think about it. I'm not saying we should write it off, but I do think we have to think seriously about how that would really work in practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Try and answer a couple of questions that have been asked. First one is about divide and rule, and I think there is definitely an attempt at the moment on the part of the government to say we can either close this A&E and that A&E, we can close this hospital or that hospital, and to create divide and rule. Now in Bolton, when they threatened a whole number of A&Es across Greater Manchester, we fought for a political sort of line that said we want to save all the A&Es, and it's now currently sort of, you know, that where I work in Bolton, it's either Bolton or Wigan. And our petition says we want all of them, that if one of them closes, it will have a massive impact on the one that's staying open, and that's not a victory for the one that stays open. And we have to make sure that we don't let them divide and rule. Second question I wanted to answer was the one about Unison, and about how Unison's not 100% supportive for all the campaigns. And yeah, I'm on the Unison National Executive, I'm not speaking on behalf of them, although I am a Unison activist, and I think that there is a tendency sometimes to just put Unison in one big sort of lot, and I think there is a whole set of battles going on in Unison. There are 1.3 million members, there are a lot of activists, and I think the danger is that we write off the whole 1.3 million people because of the errors that some of the branches make. And I think those errors are driven by their relationship with the Labour Party. People who think that the strategy is we should just wait for Labour. And I mean, there's a lot of people in Unison who think, will we get Labour at the election, seeing as how they seem to be wanting to do exactly the same as the Tories. It's not very inspiring to go and vote for them at a ballot box. So even if we get them, what will they do? And they seem to be saying they'll do the same, and therefore it isn't a real change. And I think that does mean that there are battles going on, both at the national level and in every branch and in every hospital, about what should the union be doing and how should it react. And I think the worst thing to do when that battle's going on is to actually leave the battleground and go and join Unite and leave it in the hands of the right wing. I think that would be a terrible mistake to make. I think we have to battle and fight, because when Unison shifts, it shifts. So you look at the pension strike, you look at the big demonstrations. Actually, when we could win Unison to doing them, they were very, very good. Where branches like mine are involved in local community campaigning, it actually makes a difference to that community campaign in its ability to organise and fight. And I think we have to not give up on that battle. And I think that, you know, we are right to say you can't trust the trade union leaders when they shift, but I think you have to be careful not to end up being cynical, because people who feel that, you know, they just got rid of the pensions dispute easily, and I think are wrong. In Unison, it took them 8 months to abandon the fight over the pensions. When they said that they were going to go to negotiations, it took them 8 months before they had a ballot as to whether we should accept the crappy offer. We had a ballot, and actually we rejected the crappy offer in Unison Health. People might not know that, but we didn't accept the crappy offer. What we didn't then have is enough strength on the ground when the bureaucracy said, I'm ignoring that ballot and we're just going to accept the crappy offer anyway, to change that decision. And I think that's why we've got to build on the ground a bigger side, a bigger number of people who are organised, a bigger number of people who don't want to sort of see one sell out after another. But in a way, the way to do that, right, is to end up building the biggest demonstration in Manchester possible, the biggest local campaigns possible, the biggest number of people who are organised and understand that the bureaucracy and the trade union leaders can sometimes be with us and sometimes be against us. And that's not always an easy task, and it does drive you mad at times. But to be honest, if class struggle was easy, we would have socialism 20, 30, 100 years ago. It's not easy, it's a battle we have to have. They fight tooth and nail. And I think we have to say that the best way to do that is to be the biggest and best campaigners. And that means we do have to go from here and have those planning, organising meetings. There has to be leaflets available in every town and city that says where your coach is leaving from, or at least who's starting to organise it, that we have campaign committees that don't leave it for sort of September, a few weeks before the demonstration, before we start to think about those things seriously. How do we link the community campaigns? And I think when we do that, that then raises a whole set of questions for us about how we organise, which is why I think after the 29th of September, we do have to sign up people to the Unite the Resistance conference, where I think there's an opportunity for us to have, it's a workshop-based conference about learning skills. How do we use the media? And there are people who have fantastic experience of doing that we shouldn't have to learn from scratch in every single campaign. How do we relate community campaign to the hospital? How do we organise it very unorganised workplaces where there isn't anybody? How do we take up racism? All those are workshops that will be available at that Unite the Resistance conference. And we want to be not just there ourselves, but all the other people who want to fight. We need to have them with us doing that as well. And I want to end really that sometimes it can feel like at the moment everything's coming at you and it's overwhelming and it's hopeless. And I just want to take you to Brazil. Brazil a few weeks ago, there was a very small bus fare rise which just sparked huge protests that appeared to come out of nowhere. Even after they abandoned the bus fare hike, right, those protests continued because it wasn't just about bus fares, it was about the whole austerity packages and the cuts. Out of that already, they have conceded 10,000 extra doctors, right, for the Brazilian health service. And I just think that we can, you could think 6 weeks ago, if you were in Brazil, you might have been fairly hopeless about the opportunity for healthcare. You might not have known. Things can come out of nowhere. But I think we have to be prepared when there is a sort of, a bus fare hike or whatever, it might be over the health service station, or it might be over anything else, that we're actually prepared to push it further and to fight for the things that we really want. And in the process of that fight, you begin to see a little bit of an alternative world. And I want to end with, I was out on strike in 1988 for a month. We ran our hospital for a month. The managers never ran anything. We controlled who worked on the wards. We controlled how they worked. We controlled what work they did. We made managers come and work on the wards because there wasn't any emergency cover. We worked emergency cover, so to be on strike, we had to make the managers do our jobs. We told them what to do on the wards. Some of them had to have their fingernails cut and buy proper flat shoes because they'd never done it in their life. They closed a ward, and the night nurse who worked on that ward came in and sat on her ward, and within a couple of hours all the patients had come back on that ward in order to say, we don't want to be distributed around the hospital, we want the ward and the nurses we want. Now that's not socialism, but it gives you a little bit of a sign of what's possible. And I do think that those sort of campaigns give you a sense of the health service has always been something that I think for people in Britain symbolises not profit but need, real sense of what people want. And I think that's why whatever we do, we will always get a response when we call about the NHS, and there are opportunities, we should use them. Thank you.